Hi, everybody. Welcome to the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a very interesting one, especially to talk about right after the nervous system, because they work very closely together, right? They both control the body in lots of different ways, right? In the beginning, we talked about both of them being the boss of the body. Um, Nervous system sends signals to innervate all the body. The endocrine system is going to send chemical signals to help maintain homeostasis. So some of the components of the endocrine system, you're going to look at a lot of glands. So like the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, and the adrenal gland. Also like the thymus, the kidneys, the pancreas, the gonads, the heart, the digestive tract. So really what you're seeing here, right? If you're looking at this and you're looking at all the parts that are highlighted here, it's a lot of the body. And these are just some of the examples, right? The reality is the endocrine system innervates almost every single part of your body in some capacity, right? We can make a stretch and get there in some way. The function of the endocrine system is to maintain total body metabolism. It helps a lot with growth and then reproduction. It's going to be in control of long-term changes in your body's homeostasis. And then again, it's the other boss of the body. Largely the difference between the endocrine system and the nervous system is going to be the speed at which the signals that are getting sent work, right? So again, we said the nervous system is going to send electrical signals. Those electrical signals work very, very, very fast, right? We talked about them working pretty much instantaneously. They can communicate in 1/1000th of a second. Another thing about the nervous system is the effects can be reversed or modified almost instantaneously. And then the system is hardwired into your body, but it has the ability to be modified. So like through different nervous system activations. Hormones communicate in seconds, minutes, or hours, right? And then sometimes you have the ability to store some hormones and keep them there for months at a time before you even utilize them. The time needed to reverse or modify the effects is very different. It's also longer. And then the hormones are going to be dependent upon innervation from the nervous system, right? That's how your hormones or your glands know when to make and secrete these hormones. So here's your kind of view on similarities and differences, right? So nervous system, again, it's a neurotransmitter because it's going to convert into the electrical signal when the neurotransmitter binds to the receptor. Then the hormone is going to be the endocrine's method of sending signals. A nervous system area of influence, it's localized to the synapse. So really what that means is where the neuron synapse is, that's where you're going to have an effect take place. Whereas the endocrine system, you're going to transport the hormone through the body by your bloodstream, and it could target any area, right? Site of action is going to be a postsynaptic membrane, which is either going to be a muscle or a gland. Endocrine system, it's going to have a target receptor in itself, right, in the self cell nearby or on other cells and other organs. So it could be longer distances. Target cells here, neurons, muscles, or glands, and then the endocrine can target any cell of the body, which is why when we say like we could figure out how the endocrine could innervate every part of the body, that's why. Again, the speed, milliseconds to seconds, minutes, hours, days. Duration of response, super fast, and then much longer. Modification of the response, they can be modified almost instantly, but again, the endocrine system would need much more time to reverse the effects. And then the nervous system is hardwired, but can be modified, and then the endocrine has to rely on the nervous system. So hormonal control, hormones and neurohormones are also called neurotransmitters, are going to be released by endocrine glands directly into the bloodstream. So the whole body is your target. You're not looking for a synapse or like where you're ending. The target cell contains specific receptors. Hormones will only affect certain cells because the hormone can bind to a specific receptor. In order for a chemical to function in physiological regulation, the target cell has to have that specific receptor. That's the same thing that this says, just in a different way. So that's 2 times already that we said it and back to back, which means it's important. The combination of molecule and receptor is going to cause a specific change in that cell. And then you must have a chemical to turn off the actions. So a little bit different than the nervous system, right? When there's no more stimulus, that's when the signal stops getting sent from the neurons. But for the endocrine system, the hormones are going to be something that are being secreted and turning them on, but then you also need to have something that's going to shut them off. Okay, so hormonal interactions with the plasma membrane. When we have polar molecules that are hydrophilic, they cannot pass freely through the plasma membrane. So they actually have to bind to a receptor embedded in that plasma membrane. The effect of that is going to be mediated by a second messenger system. A second messenger system just means when the hormone binds to the receptor, it's going to jumpstart another conversion or enzyme or pathway to begin. Some examples of these are polypeptides, glycoproteins, and catecholamines. The nonpolar molecule is going to be lipophilic. These pass through the plasma membrane. The receptor is in the cytoplasm or the nucleus, so it can just get straight through. Some examples here, steroids. So from the adrenal cortex, like corticosteroids, or from the gonads, androgens, estrogens, or progesterone. Another example here is the thyroid hormone. So it's specifically, they're called T3 and T4, which is triiodothyronine and thyroxine. Okay, so this is kind of what the hormone mechanism looks like for a steroid hormone and then a protein hormone, right? So on the left side, we've got the steroid. The steroid, again, if we jump back, is a non-polar molecule, so it's lipophilic, and it means it can go directly through the plasma membrane. So the steroid is going to enter into the cell, and it binds, the steroid is the orange dot, by the way. The steroid binds to this green receptor. When that takes place, there's going to be a response that's going to occur, and it's going to jumpstart the process of transcription, which converts DNA into RNA. And then after that, translation will occur, which takes that RNA and then converts it into proteins. And every single time, that's what we're trying to do, right? We're going to try to create proteins because your body's cellular activity is directed by the proteins that are created here. On the right side, you see protein hormones. So the protein hormones are going to bind to the receptor. So the protein hormones are purple. They're going to bind to that brown receptor that's embedded in the blue plasma membrane. And then from there, they're going to cause one of a couple of things to happen, right? Ligand-gated channels to open, enzymes linked together to help with G protein coupled receptors or activate integrins. From there, they activate a second messenger system, and then you'll create the response from there and develop the proteins. So the idea with the protein hormone, if you guys are tracking, is this has a lot more steps to it, right? Including this whole second messenger system. But the reality is there's a lot of enzymes involved on this side. So while there's more steps to the pathway, it actually happens a lot faster than the steroid hormone mechanism does. It takes longer to get from a steroid to a protein than it does from the protein hormone to the protein itself. So here are some second messenger systems, right? So a ligand-gated channel is going to open ion channels and allow a change in membrane polarity for signals to get sent. A G protein coupled receptor, or a GPCR, is going to generate or create cyclic AMP to activate enzymatic pathways that we would then call like an enzyme cascade. It's basically this like domino effect where when you start the first enzyme, the other ones just kind of fall down with it or get jump started with it. You could also use what's called a phospholipase C, which would result in what we call it an IP3, but it's really an inositol triphosphate. That would cause an increase in calcium in the cells, which would then help create the proteins. Or it's called a diacylglycerol, or a DAG, to activate other enzymatic pathways, again, to create the proteins. You could also use enzyme-linked receptors like a tyrosine kinase, which is going to activate or inactivate enzymatic pathways. And all of these hormone responses are very complex, but that's just kind of the general what we want you to know right now. So for a hormone response, there's a response to hormone signals that depend on the chemical nature of the hormone and the receptors and the metabolic enzyme pathways in the target cell. So here's the overview of lipophilic versus hydrophilic, right? Hormones. And this is stuff that we just talked about in the previous couple slides. So I'm going to leave this review here for you guys. Hormonal interactions. So cells have receptors for more than one hormone. Hormones have the ability to work in a couple different ways. We've talked about these already when we went through the muscular system. So it's the same concept, but instead of muscles now, you're talking about hormones. So permissively means that there's an action of one hormone that's going to enable or create the ability for the other one to work. Synergistically means they work in a similar way to produce the same response. And then antagonistically means they work opposite. So maybe like one of them increases your blood sugar levels and then the other one decreases your blood sugar levels, right? That's opposite antagonistic. Okay, you have endocrine reflexes, three different kinds: humoral, neural, and hormonal. A humoral response or reflex is when hormones are secreted in direct response to blood concentration. So the example they're using here is the capillary blood contains low concentration of calcium ions. That's going to cause the parathyroid glands to release PTH, the capillaries to like activate that. So if there's low calcium concentration in the blood, it causes the parathyroid glands to release PTH, which is a parathyroid hormone. So secretion of PTH and the parathyroid hormone. The neural endocrine reflex is a nerve fiber that releases hormones. So like the sympathetic autonomic nervous system will cause the adrenal medulla or the adrenal cortex, right, to release some sort of hormone that is going to help the capillaries reach homeostasis. And then the last one's hormonal stimulus. This is the hypothalamus secretes hormones that are going to stimulate the anterior or posterior pituitary to secrete or release the hormone from there and then hit their target gland, whatever that may be. The endocrine reflex looks very similar to what you guys saw already for like homeostasis, because that's the whole goal, right? The hormones are released to in pulsatile fashion to prevent downregulation of receptors or upregulation. So that's the idea that like either you're getting rid of receptors and becoming more sensitive to the chemical, or you're adding more receptors and becoming desensitized to the chemical. And the negative feedback control is going to be used to help maintain homeostasis here. Okay, so getting into the depth of the hormones, the hypothalamus is probably one of the more important parts for the endocrine system because it's the area, right? The place where there are 9 different hormones made in this one location. So break it down into different areas, right? So the hypothalamus, where it's located, is in the forebrain, at the floor and the interior walls of the third ventricle, the interior portion of the diencephalon. So in the hypothalamus, there's numerous nuclei which are going to mediate hunger, thirst, temperature, pain, sleep, arousal, sexual function, anger, fear, pleasure, visceral responses to emotional states, regulation of the pituitary gland, and also regulation of the ANS. So obviously there's a lot that's being controlled by the hypothalamus. Outside of that, right, you have specific hypothalamic nuclei functionality. So the supraoptic nucleus is an area where you have neurons that extend their axons into the posterior pituitary. These are important because they're going to release the antidiuretic hormone from the posterior pituitary, which is going to target the kidneys and help your body maintain the proper amount of water and solute concentration. Then you also have the paraventricular nucleus. This is where you have neurons that extend the axons to the posterior pituitary and they release oxytocin. Oxytocin will then target the uterus and cause contractions for a pregnant mom. Axons from the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract are going to go then to the neurohypophysis through the posterior pituitary. Okay, so posterior pituitary. It is this purple portion right here that is going to be attached to the hypothalamus, which you see in blue here. And then by the stalk, that's called the infundibulum, which you see as orange there. There's axons present in the posterior pituitary and again, the hypophyseal portal veins are going to carry hormones from the hypothalamus to the hypophysis. There's two lobes that are going to be divided by structure. So you're going to divide the pituitary into the front and the back, or the anterior and the posterior pituitary. So the anterior pituitary is also called the adenohypophysis or the pars dorsalis. And then the posterior pituitary is also going to be called the neurohypophysis or the pars nervosa. Okay, so we'll start in the back, right, at the posterior pituitary. There's only two hormones that are going to be stored here, ADH and oxytocin. So again, ADH is going to be released from the supraoptic nucleus in a response to the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. The idea there is to create a rise in blood osmotic pressure. And then it would be inhibited by stretch receptors in the left atria of the heart, which would cause an increase in blood volume. So ADH is going to control your body's water balance. The target cells are going to hit the kidney, specifically the collecting ducts, and then they're going to stimulate reabsorption of water. So you can also take drugs that would help with this. So there's like a syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion, which would cause your body to retain too much water. So you would need to counteract that in some way. And then diabetes insipidus, there's a lack of ADH or of the receptors in the collecting duct that would cause the holes to open up to reabsorb the water. And in that case, there would be too much water that is being released. Also in the pituitary, you have oxytocin. This is going to be released when there is a signal getting sent to the paraventricular nucleus. So that would be due to mechanical stimulus of suckling from an infant or a baby. And then also it could be in response to stretch receptors in the cervix that have the head of the fetus pushing on it. In both of those cases, oxytocin is going to be released. In the case of the fetus head pushing on the cervix, oxytocin would target the uterus and cause the myometrium to contract. In the case of suckling and the baby essentially eating, oxytocin would target the mammary glands and cause milk ejection to occur. Both of those, right, targets are going to be inhibited by stress or fright. So a mom's too stressed out or too scared, and she won't release enough oxytocin to either target the mammary glands or the uterus. And then this is going to be obviously controlling smooth muscle contraction. Perfect. We just talked about that. The anterior pituitary. Okay, so the anterior pituitary is in control of storage for a lot more hormones. There are going to be what we call RHs and IHs. So RHs are going to be releasing hormones, and IHs are going to be inhibiting hormones. There are axons here that are going to be leading to the median eminence, and then they would be released in the blood capillaries through the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. So the portal system, you have in this portal system, you have fenestrated capillaries, which just means they have holes in them. And basically, it's just a way for your body to carry the hormones that were made in the hypothalamus and push them into the pituitary gland for storage. Okay, so the hypothalamic hormones, there's corticotropin releasing hormone, which is going to cause the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone. There's the gonadotropin releasing hormones, which is going to cause the release or the inhibition of the follicle stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone. Then there's prolactin inhibiting hormone that's going to cause dopamine to be released. And also PRL is prolactin, so it stops prolactin release. Then you have the thyrotropin releasing hormone, which is going to stimulate the release of the thyroid stimulating hormone. And then growth hormone releasing hormone is going to cause the release of growth hormone. And then lastly, somatostatin is going to cause the release, or sorry, the inhibition, right? You're going to turn off growth hormone. Okay, so with the anterior pituitary, the suffix tropin, it means to nourish, right? Or it stimulates the target to grow and secrete. So like ACTH, the adrenocorticotropic hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone. This is the luteinizing hormone. Prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, and then growth hormone. Okay, so just of the anterior pituitary here, all of these are going to be under negative feedback control. So ACTH, TSH, FSH, and LH, there's going to be inhibition at two different levels, the hypothalamus, which is going to cause a decrease in the release of hormones. And then at the adenohypophysis, there's going to be a decrease in stimulation of the hormones here. So for your example here, your metabolic rate and or your T3, T4 concentration in the blood is high, right? So if it's high, the hypothalamus is going to stop the TRH from being released because that will cut back on those thyroid hormones. And then the anterior pituitary would stop also TSH from being released, which would allow the T3, T4 to continually be created and put into the bloodstream. So the hypothalamus pituitary target organ axis. So this is just showing you there is going to be a stimulus that is caused away from the step point. There is a releasing hormone response. There's a tropic hormone response, a target gland, and then a negative feedback loop that would push everything back up into homeostasis. TRH, TSH, and thyroid. So the thyroid gland is located inferior to the larynx. There's two different lobes here and here on either side of the trachea, and then it also has thyroglobulins in the follicles. At the end of hormone production, you create triiodothyronine and then thyroxine. Both of those can be put into circulation and carried to their target site to elicit a response, which is maintenance of your body's metabolism. So again, triiodothyronine and thyroxine, they're going to control your basal metabolic rate, which is your heart or your metabolism rate. And then it's going to also increase the production of ATP, body temperature, and then increase the use of glucose and fatty acids for energy. It would also cause protein synthesis to be increased, but then to store those for somewhere else for later use. And then also when you're producing enough T3, T4, your cholesterol should be decreasing in quantity. Okay, so GnRH, FSH, and the gonadal hormones. GnRH is going to stimulate the release of FSH. The target is going to be the follicular cells for females, which would cause estrogen to release and develop the follicle, and then also help with the menstrual cycle. For males, it would target the sustentacular cells, and it's going to cause spermatogenesis, which is the creation of sperm. For both of them, it would also cause the development of primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So for males, this one's easy. It's like the deepening of the voice and the development of musculature, things like that. GnRH would stimulate the release of the luteinizing hormone. So for females, the target here is the follicular cells. It would cause estrogen and progesterone levels to be released and develop the corpus luteum, which is a structure that is utilized because it has the ability to provide some nutrients to the fetus, but it's only going to be utilized for a little while until there's another source that's ready to take over. And then the Leydig cells are what LH would target in the males, and it would create the production of testosterone. And again, like the production of testosterone would create more growth of the primary and secondary sex characteristics. So here's a view for you guys of what this might look like, right? So at the beginning, you approximately at this person is age 8, the hypothalamus increases its production of GnRH. GnRH then triggers the anterior pituitary to release LH and FSH. From there, it's going to target, we'll just go the female side. So it's going to target the ovary and cause the development of the oocytes or the eggs, and then also the release of the egg from the ovary into the fallopian tube. From there, the female would also develop secondary sex characteristics like the development of breasts, the broadening of hips for the birth canal, and then also hair. So this is kind of what that looks like just from the female side of it, right? It would cause estrogen and progesterone to increase their release. FSH is going to stimulate the ovarian follicle to release estrogen. The follicular phase of the uterine lining and the development of the follicle would be created. the positive feedback loop with the luteinizing hormone. So you would get a surge of LH in a mid-cycle. So we're talking about the like the menstrual cycle, and it would cause ovulation. So this is a follicle that would become an egg. And when it's fully ready, it's called a Graafian follicle or a tertiary follicle. When it's ready, that egg on the inside of it has the ability to be expelled. So that's specifically what the feedback loop with the luteinizing hormone causes, is this lining that you see of the ovary, it thins out for the female, and literally this egg just like bursts out. After the egg bursts out, you have the development of what's called the corpus luteum. This is a structure that's going to help release hormones, estrogen and progesterone, until the placenta can take over when the zygote moves into the endometrial lining. Again, for the males, it's going to cause androgen release like testosterone. The seminiferous tubules that are inside of the testes have Leydig cells. Those are going to help create sperm. The luteinizing hormone acts on the Leydig cells. And then FSH is going to act on sustentacular cells and cause the release of testosterone to continue to develop the primary and secondary sex characteristics. PIH. So prolactin is usually suppressed by PIH from the hypothalamus, and that's most of your life. However, prolactin is a target for, the target is breast tissue. So after birth, when mom wants to nurse baby, the mom has to produce milk. So prolactin is the hormone that's going to help the production of milk. And then again, oxytocin will come over and it will cause the release of the milk out of the body. So GnRH, somatostatin, and growth hormone. GnRH stimulates the production of BH, while somatostatin is going to inhibit it. Somatotropin is another name for growth hormone. And then the target is going to be protein metabolism. So it promotes cell division, protein synthesis, and then also bone growth. And then also the skeletal and muscular development will continue, and the height and weight will increase. If there's not enough of the growth hormone, it can cause what's called pituitary dwarfism, or too much, it would cause acromegaly. So this is pituitary dwarfism. And then the top, this is actually the same person, just over a period of time. It's called acromegaly, where so specific parts of the body tend to develop more, but the whole idea is that because there's a lot of growth hormone being secreted throughout the lifetime, there are lots of things that are still growing. So you'll see like the facial features of this person are really, really changing. Or you'll see like the broadening of eyes and the jaw and the shoulders and the hands, and just overgrowth over time is what happens. CRH and the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and also glucocorticoids. So the stress hormone is known as the fight or flight one. That's cortisol. The hypothalamus controls the medulla through the nervous system and controls the cortex through the adrenocorticotropic hormone releasing hormone. So CRH causes ACTH production. It would target the zona fasciculata of the adrenal cortex and cause glucocorticoids to be released. You would try to control your blood volume and blood pressure, and also changes in protein, fat, and carbohydrate metabolism when you're really stressed. So some people eat when they're stressed, and some people forget to eat when they're stressed. This is what the adrenal gland looks like, right? So you see the kidney here, that's that bean-shaped structure, and then the adrenal gland sits on top of it. So we'd say it caps the kidneys. If you look at a cross-section of it, you can see that the adrenal gland has two different parts. The part that's bracketed here is called the adrenal cortex. That part in the center, that lighter pink part, is called the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal medulla is part of the sympathoadrenal system, sorry about that, which is going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. The cortex of it is going to have three different zones. Those zones are going to be called the zona reticularis, fasciculata, and, oh, we don't even give them to you. Okay, never mind. Don't worry about the zones. Just realize what comes from them. So the three hormones that come from them are going to be the mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and then androgens. So the important one here is that the glucocorticoids are going to be releasing a corticosteroid hormone that's going to be stimulated by ACTH. So here's what could possibly happen, right? You have an imbalance in your body of these hormones, which would cause the hormone release from the pituitary. The CRH would begin this cascade that triggers the adrenal gland to release the glucocorticoids in the blood. You start to correct the values in your body, and then you reach homeostasis again. So general adaptation syndrome is a non-specific stress stimulus that both the medulla and the cortex have. So there's 3 stages here. Number 1 is the alarm reaction. So it's going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine from the medulla. Number 2 is the stage of resistance. So ACTH causes glucocorticoids to be released. And then there's a stage of exhaustion. So hypertrophy of the adrenal glands, inhibition of the immune system, bleeding, possibly causing peptic ulcers. So the hypersecretion of glucocorticoids will, over a long period of time, lead to a range of stress-related diseases and disorders, anything from depression, anxiety, hypertension, obesity, the development of type 2 diabetes, and then even increased risk for cardiac disease like heart attacks or strokes. Oops. I don't know what just happened. Go back into it. I think I was. Okay. This is just an example for you guys on the posterior pituitary hormones, right? So you have ADH, what it targets and what it does when it gets there. Oxytocin, what it targets and what it does when it gets there. And then also the anterior, what the name of it is, what the hormone is called, what it targets, and then what it does when it gets there. Here's a different view of it, right? So you've got the posterior pituitary, ADH hits the kidneys, oxytocin hits either the uterus or the mammary glands, or for males, it does target the ductus deferens from the prostate and the prostate. Anterior pituitary, ACTH targets the adrenal cortex and medulla, releasing epinephrine, norepinephrine. TSH targets the thyroid gland, which releases T3, T4. The GH, right, the growth hormone targets mainly the bones and muscles of the body because they require so much growth, but the reality is that growth hormone targets everywhere. Prolactin targets the mammary glands. FSH and LH are going to target the reproductive organs, so like the ovaries or the testes. And then the last one, which we don't really talk about too much, is the melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH, and that's going to target the melanocytes, which are the cells that produce melanin, which is a protein pigment in your body that helps make it more resistant to sunlight, or it gives it its color. Okay, so with the hormones that get released by humoral reflex, hormones are going to be produced in response to the concentration of ions and molecules in your bloodstream. So you can control things like calcium concentration of the blood. So the 2 hormones here that are important are parathyroid hormone and then calcitonin. So the parathyroid hormone is going to come from the parathyroid glands, which are 4 bean-like structures on the backside of the thyroid. They have principal cells inside of them that produce the parathyroid hormone. The parathyroid hormone would get released in response to a decrease in blood calcium concentration. So you woke up in the morning and you went to work out, and then you went to school, and then you took a break for lunch, right? During that amount of time, your body needs calcium for contractions and ion movement for your nervous system, but you didn't consume any. Well, that's okay. Your parathyroid hormone would come into play. And because you have decreased calcium concentrations, it would target your bone and cause your bone to release some of the stored calcium there. Calcitonin is the opposite of that. So it is produced in the parafollicular cells of the thyroid gland, and it is released in response to an increase in calcium levels. So let's say, again, for example, you woke up in the morning, but then you had coffee with creamer and cereal with milk, and you drank the milk and yogurt. After that, you sat down and you studied, right? Your your supply of calcium is high in your bloodstream, but you're not utilizing it very much because all you did was sit back down. So in this case, your body would release calcitonin from the parafollicular cells, and it would cause your body to take the extra calcium in the blood and put it into the bone, right? It would deposit it into the bone or store it in the bone. This is the same thing that we were just talking about on the previous page, but it's just not in picture form. Okay, so how do we control salt homeostasis in the body? Well, we know it's really important because we talked about tonicity, right? And tonicity is your body's ability to regulate the amount of water and solute in the environment to maintain its proper structure so it can maintain the proper function. Well, we have something called the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system for your kidneys that's going to help maintain homeostasis of solute like salt and then water. So again, the RAS has an effect on tonicity and osmosis, and then also on intracellular fluid volume. It also controls sodium, right? Control of sodium is one of the most complex in the body because the sodium content largely will determine how much water you need present. So the adrenal gland is going to be critical for this control. The adrenal gland cortex, oh, we did go through the layers, sorry. Okay, I thought we skipped them, but here they are. So the three regions of the adrenal cortex, again, the zona reticularis, the zona fasciculata, and the zona glomerulosa. The zona reticularis releases androgens, fasciculata releases glucocorticoids, and the glomerulus is going to release aldosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone that's going to be really important for the balance of sodium and potassium in your body. So the zona glomerulosa and aldosterone are going to be under control of the RAAS. So renin from the kidneys, the RAAS needs renin involved in it in the pathway. So what we're saying is this is where we get it, right? If we need it involved in the system, where do we get it from? Oh, well, we get it from the kidneys. And specifically, there are a line of cells right here. That green line of cells are called the macula densa cells. Those are going to be what release the renin to help make sure that the salts or solutes are going to be in correct ratio with the water of the body. So when you juxtapose things together, you're like overlapping one on top of the other. So the juxtaglomerular cells are going to be these ones right here, where you're overlapping this area from the distal convoluted tubule and the glomerulus. They have what we call the afferent arterial cells that are going to be in contact with the distal convoluted tubule, which is where you see that line right there of macula densa cells. And in this case, there's a decrease in blood pressure that would stimulate the release of renin. So here it is, the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So renin is an enzyme that's going to convert angiotensinogen from the liver into ANG1. So it might be a little bit more beneficial to look down at the image down here rather than follow the words. So again, renin comes from the kidneys and it gets released into the bloodstream. Angiotensinogen is going to come from the liver. But now since they're both in the bloodstream, and after they interact with this enzyme that's called ACE, which comes from the lungs, the ACE is an angiotensin converting enzyme. So angiotensin, hold on really quick. 1 second. Hey, Zoe, I'm using this link to record right now. Would you mind jumping out and just waiting a couple more minutes?
Yeah, for sure. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay, no problem. Okay, so again, the renin angiotensin aldosterone system is going to get ACE, which is the angiotensin converting enzyme from the lungs, and it's going to convert angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. Then angiotensin 2 is going to cause aldosterone to be released, and aldosterone will target the kidneys, specifically the nephron, and cause reabsorption of salt in the kidneys. It would allow water to be retained or pulled back into the body. blood volumes to rise, and then blood pressures to increase as well. We also can control water homeostasis in this area. Water homeostasis could be critical for all cells to function. The effects here would be on tonicity and osmosis, and then the effects on the intracellular fluid volume. It could also affect water pressure, blood. Water pressure is going to be the blood pressure in the body, so it could affect hydrostatic pressure too. And then also controlled water and salt homeostasis by these three hormonal controls, right? ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormone, the RAS, which is RAAS, and then one more, which is called the atrial natriuretic peptide, which actually comes from the heart. So this is what it looks like in a full figure form, and we will cover this extensively in class. This is kind of the culmination of it, right? So the RAAS, ADH, and blood pressure, how they all interrelate. There's going to be a decrease in blood pressure or dehydration, which is going to be sensed by the juxtaglomerular apparatus. That's going to cause renin to be released. Renin then helps form ANG2, which then increases the osmolality of blood, which causes ADH from the hypothalamus to be released. That's going to help regulate the water volumes. ANG2 also is going to cause the hypothalamus to cause you to be thirsty. It's also going to cause blood pressure to be changed through the sympathetic nervous system. The overall result will be the RAAS causes water and salt retention in the body and blood pressure to increase. So again, RAS and the atrial natriuretic peptide, your heart is going to actually have the ability to respond to an increase in blood pressure by releasing the ANP. So this would cause an antagonistic effect to ANG2, and then would stop renin from being secreted, cause ADH to be halted, and then hopefully cause the body to excrete sodium and then water as well to try to bring down blood pressure. So control of glucose homeostasis. The pancreas is both exocrine and endocrine functionality. The endocrine portion is going to cause the alpha cells to release glucagon and beta cells to release insulin. Glucagon is going to help to increase your blood sugar levels, and then insulin is going to cause your cells to decrease your blood sugar levels. So if you have a rise in blood glucose concentration, the beta cells release insulin. It promotes entry of glucose into the tissues like the liver, the muscle, or the adipocytes. And then you can convert glucose into glycogen for storage. Insulin allows the entry of amino acids into the cells to increase your cellular protein production. And it's going to be, again, antagonistic to glucagon, which would cause a decrease in blood glucose concentration. Some last other hormones of interest, prostaglandins, they act as paracrine hormones on tissues. Their effects are widespread, but if we try to boil it down to its easiest simple form here, it causes smooth muscles to contract, glands to release their contents, platelets to be formed, fat to be metabolized, nerves to send signals, inflammation to be caused, and then reproductive organs to function. MSH, the melanocyte stimulating hormone, again comes from the anterior pituitary. It targets melanocytes in the skin and causes melanin to be formed. That's present to help protect against sunlight. It could be overly activated during fetal development and pregnancy, which is sometimes why you see skin changes during that time. The pineal gland is another important one. It produces melatonin. That's going to help control your circadian rhythms, which we also talk about as your sleep-wake cycles. The juxtaglomerular apparatus is going to decrease the partial pressures of O2 and lead to the secretion of erythropoietin. Adipose tissue is going to produce leptin. The thymus is going to help develop T cells, which help with your body's immune system. And then the GI tract has a lot of different hormones here that are going to help digest your food. The placenta is going to cause the release of what's called the human chorionic gonadotropin, which is the hormone that would be detected in like an over-the-counter pregnancy test. Also estrogens, progesterones, and somatotropins. They help with maintaining the corpus luteum, preventing immunological rejection of, and then diabetic-like glucose metabolism. The last part here is just the relationship between the endocrine system and all other systems of your body. Again, they're all interrelated and very important. The last slide here is just clinical issues. So we have some medications that you can take that would help with controlling the inappropriate amounts of ADH secretion, which basically just means your body's retaining too much water and you need to get rid of some of it so you're not swelling. A goiter, which could be caused by the thyroid either overproducing or underproducing the thyroid hormones. Cushing syndrome, which is due to hypersecretion of the corticosteroids. This is where you have changes in carbohydrates and protein metabolism that leads to something like hyperglycemia, hypertension, or even weakness of the body. Addison's disease is due to hyposecretion of corticosteroids. And this is where you have carbohydrate and protein metabolism that causes hypoglycemia, hypotension, dehydration, and then sometimes severe electrolyte imbalances. High blood pressure. So if we know that the RAAS increases your blood pressure, if we stop that pathway from occurring by using what's called an ACE inhibitor, we can stop the conversion into ANG2, which would decrease your blood pressure. This has a huge pharmaceutical benefit because there are lots of people that have high blood pressure. And then the last one is diabetes mellitus. So type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, right, is from either insulin dependent, meaning your beta cells don't produce insulin, or non-insulin dependent diabetes, which means they have basically been overused their whole lifespan and they're just weakened and not producing enough insulin in order to regulate your blood sugar levels. Okay, you guys, that is it for endocrine.